Welcome to another occurrence of Resilience Reimagined. The deans, which is me, Alexander Sietschlag, your favorite dean of the Embry-Riddle Worldwide College Arts and Sciences. I hope. Thank you for joining. So Resilience Imagined is a relatively new speaker series of our college, where we look at resilience as related to civil, homeland security, emergency management from different perspectives across tiers of government and also internationally. And today, very important, we look at, through the resilience lens, we look at local government planning and execution, a practical perspective. The college is developing a virtual collaborative hub of resilience and security, education, research, and outreach. So that series is a building block for that emerging hub as well. And the Resilience Reimagined series is also intended to bring fresh perspectives to the table and think out of the box, and then also have a inspiring conversation. The the most recent, so this is focused on the US apparently, within the series that also looks at things internationally. So we have a very important focus on our own nation this day here. And obviously there is the National Preparedness Goal of 2011 that has been subsequently updated, issued by the US Department of Homeland Security. And the progress towards that goal is measured or reviewed annually in the National Preparedness Report. And the most recent report, published in December 2022 by DHS, among other things, concludes that resilience cannot be achieved without equitable consideration for and participation of all community members. So therefore, local government planning, execution, practical perspective, local level, very, very important. The report also underscores the need to bring national resilience capability targets closer to community goals at the local level. So very important that we address that here. So with that, without further ado, I'd like once again to welcome and introduce Mayor Eric Diaz-Padron, who is joined by Commissioner Ivan Chavez, both of the city of West Miami, and who will provide an inside perspective into the considerations and planning within a local government in dealing with natural disasters in South Florida. Mayor Diaz-Padron is a dedicated and experienced public servant with proven leadership and public service record. Eric is an attorney and attended the University of Miami School of Law, graduating with honors. In the private sector, Eric works as the head of Southeast US for Jolt Charge, an international electric vehicle charging network. In addition to his role as mayor, he currently serves on the board of directors for the MIAMI-DADE League of Cities and the MIAMI-DADE International Trade Consortium. So there also we have the connection to international models and experience. So very, very important. Commissioner Chavez is a proud third-generation civil servant. So thank you to you and your family for that. Working as a fire lieutenant for the Miami Beach Fire Department. He is also a rescue specialist on the Urban Search and Rescue South Florida Task Force 2. In addition to his role as a commissioner, Ivan serves on the Florida League of Cities Legislative Policy Committee, very important, dealing with emergency management and public safety, among other topics. Gentlemen, with that, the floor is yours. Please go ahead. And thanks everybody for joining. Looking forward.
Yeah, I saw that happening while we're waiting. It's kind of incredible. We're going to talk about the disaster preparedness from a local level, and we're going to frame that discussion in regards to hurricanes, which we're most apt at dealing with down here. Even though we'll point on other topics, but then there's some situations where you're kind of thrown into a situation where hurricanes you can see a week out and kind of prepare for in that time period. Just yesterday, we were dealing with probably the most flooding we've had in the last 10 years, regardless of hurricane or tropical storm. And it was just a Monday. And that's when your government really starts to get tested, when you can't see it coming and your plan has to be executed on our federal holiday when most of your employees are out. So that's a lot of fun, and it really puts it to test. But now we got the presentation back up, so let's kick it off.
Sounds good.
You can skip these two.
It's just a little bit of our background. Thank you for the introduction, sir.
So let's start off with the 5 phases of disaster management, right? So you can see it on the screen there, your prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. Now, prevention in the framework of a hurricane, for example, is obviously impossible unless you create some technology that can shoo a hurricane away. Prevention is not something you can do. However, in other discussions, for example, like the tragedy we had at Surfside, which I know Commissioner Chavez, with his background as a beach firefighter, was responsive to. That could have been prevented with proper inspections, et cetera, right? So the prevention prong for this framework is not feasible. The next prong is mitigation, and mitigation is where you start to where you start to mitigate the risk, right? And that's pretty self-explanatory. The preparedness part is where we come in at the full execution level, right? And that's when we're going to talk mostly in this discussion is the steps we take to prepare for disasters. Responses at the moment, so that's everything from the off-profile shifts on when the officers to making sure that residents are well and alive during the incident and immediately after. And then recovery is the most complicated and just hair-pulling process of dealing with citizens' recovery and also recovering funds that government has put out in order to respond to the incident. Next slide. So in framing the discussion, I think there's 2 things, and I don't think a lot of people will ever talk about this, but I really do believe it. One is the actual preparedness, right? So, it's to prevent the loss of life and injury, mitigate property damage, efficient use of resources, and getting back to normal life quickly. This is the stuff that actually happens, right? But then there's the other side of it, which again, I don't think you'll ever hear from another discussion, but I really do believe it, and this is where I guess politics intercepts with government, is the perception of preparedness, right? If people are not confident that your government is prepared to take on a situation, or that they are prepared to take on a situation because you have informed them properly, that's when supply chains start to break down, people start going crazy. We see it every hurricane season in Miami. The Home Depot gets run out, the supermarket's gonna run out. We have enough resources, but people overbuy, overextend themselves because they're not confident in their preparation. So the perception of preparedness is, almost as important as a mitigation strategy. And it limits accidents and it allows for efficient distribution of resources. So that tool of government to be able to communicate out, properly and actually make people feel comfortable that they are safe and that everything is taken care of and that, the things they need to know are known, I think is almost as important as a mitigation strategy as, everything else. So next slide. So in terms of hurricanes, right, just a couple of tiles to get the discussion going. So for us, storm drainage is massively important. I mentioned earlier yesterday, one of our storm pumps was struck by lightning and shut down, right? And frankly, we didn't have a backup for it. So that caused more flooding than we've had for any hurricane in the last 10 years. And it was just a massive rainstorm. Nothing that the weather could have predicted would have been that disastrous. So storm drainage, which is a lot of infrastructure costs, septic to sewer. So most of the Miami-Dade County or South Florida area is on septic tanks, which are obviously tanks that are under the house or next to the house, that are collecting what would normally go into the sewer system. So this is number one, environmentally bad. As sea level rises, these tanks will start to overflow and go into and run off into the bay, creating all sorts of issues for environment. But also they also cause a greater amount of flooding. So converting the sewer, which is probably the most expensive proposition that this South Florida area is going to have to undertake from an infrastructure perspective, is going to be massive. Luckily, my city had the foresight to do it in the 90s. So we have actually no septic tanks. We're probably the only community, one of the few communities that does not have septic tanks, but this is going to be a big issue for this county moving forward. Sandbags, which we'll go into, again, some people say they're not as useful, but they do go into the procession preparedness. Having it available makes people calmer, and does in some cases, with the right amount of them, prevent mitigation of property damage. Resilient natural landscapes. So we'll talk about it a little later, but we're partnering to put natural landscapes which absorb water quicker and actually prevent some wind barriers. These are natural species of Florida, which you don't see a lot of these native species being put out by governments down here, because the nurseries are very few and far between. But this is another case where we can talk about something outside of hurricanes, right? I'm speaking at a conference in Bermuda next week, and that conference is centered around the insurance industry with regards to climate change. One of the panelists there is from the Living Reefs Foundation, and their whole goal is to show how investing in the reefs, creating the barrier reefs, will mitigate property damage on the islands during high windstorm and flooding events. So there's a whole bunch of situations where resilient natural landscaping, whether it be some of the living seawalls that some universities are working on now, or these reef reinvigorations, or natural landscaping, can create barriers for these natural disasters. Fortified operations centers, making sure emergency management can be run through government. Energy independence, not having energy could a lot of times lead to a lot of disasters themselves. So energy independence, for example, solar, things that don't require the grid to have people go and fix it in that process. Solar is being adopted down here very quickly, and that's a really good source of independence from these disasters if you have the right battery load. Minimizing power line risk, which is again goes to the energy independence and off the grid, and make special considerations for vulnerable populations. We'll talk about it a little later. I know Commissioner Chavez will talk about it. You do a very good job of making sure that the most vulnerable populations are taken care of. Another situation of that was during COVID. A lot of people can criticize the state of Florida, but I would say that the focus on the seniors and the most vulnerable population was one of the big factors in making sure that making sure the preparedness was correct. I think that at the end of the day, the most vulnerable populations are the ones who can't get out of their house, or the ones who can't get food, or the ones who don't have sometimes family to rely on and check on them. So we make a really good, make a lot of effort to make sure that those contact informations are fresh and that we are actively checking on these people. Next slide. Governmental coordination goes into a lot of the preparedness phase. So some of it is pre-planning stages and infrastructure, finding some funding sources from the federal government, from the state government, et cetera, from either grants or from these widespread appropriations. For example, we did a lot of pipeline work here in the last couple of years, some of it through state funding, some of it through earmarks now that are available to the federal government again. I think 3 million last year came from earmarks. And so that part is very, very important. There's other coordinating factors that people don't think about though when it comes to widespread preparedness, right? So for example, the Attorney General's office is one that we coordinate a lot with to prevent price gouging. It's illegal in Florida when there's a state of emergency, and we do a lot of work with the state Attorney General's office to preemptively get to the businesses to make sure that they are aware that they're going to gouge prices and just solve some of the economic issues that people have up front. Coordination with county and state officials to create pipeline for post-storm resources. So that's when you get the water, the food, the non-perishables, ice, get people out to clear roads, major roads, All of these things need to happen in kind of coordination with each other in order to create an efficient response. Next slide. So one of the ways that we're looking to minimize, mitigate some of this is the keeping the lights on with undergrounding operations. That, down here, the power grid operator is committed to doing it over a number of years, maybe 10, 20 years. So local governments here are trying to speed that up by fronting the cost to do it. By undergrounding the lines, it avoids a tree from, when a wind event, from falling the line and taking out the power, right? Which is very big down here, especially when there's not a lot of hurricanes in the lead up to a major hurricane, because then trees have been able to grow a lot of foliage and become basically parachutes to fall over and take out infrastructure, whether it be in the ground, sewer infrastructure and pipes, or on the surface through power lines. So the tree trimming operations is also really important, just to get the branches out of the way. So in the event that there's just a tree incident that causes branches to fall, it doesn't take down power. And again, promoting solar energy uptake by eliminating permit fees, by streamlining the permitting processes, and by promoting co-ops to enhance purchasing power is also very important. Next slide. Next slide.
Next slide after innovation.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Am I still stuck on keeping the lights on here? Oh, wait, good. So innovation. This is where government is at its worst. Government, and I don't think I need to explain this to anyone, is not a hotbed for innovation. But it really should welcome it, and they should welcome everything that the private sector can offer in this regard. We're trying to create systems to really truly welcome innovation, but it's not easy. So one example of what we've been able to accomplish with a private company now is the sandbag operation. Usually, when the hurricane hits, the first thing people do is try to get sand in. And getting sand is very easy, getting bags is very hard, and getting the actual sand in the bags is much harder. So they'll drop a big pile of sand in any corner of the street, and volunteers and staff will do the tedious backbreaking work of shoveling it to fill in the sandbags, which, by the way, usually goes against OSHA requirements, and usually cannot be reported in FEMA because of some of the requirements are missing. So while and purchasing pre-filled bags, which is likely not available, also is very expensive. So now we contracted with a company that their sole purpose is actually very smart. They created a system on the tailgate of a truck that when all of these companies come in, when a storm hits Florida, all of these trucks make their way to the state to try to make sure that they're in for debris removal contracts, because you can't get enough trucks after a storm to take away debris, and it's very expensive. So they're all there waiting for the storm to pass. So in this process, in this time period, they're doing nothing. So this company comes in and puts these tailgates on the truck that pumps sand basically, and it allows us to fill these sandbags in 5 seconds or less at a much more efficient rate, and with meeting OSHA requirements, etc. And on top of that, we can actually meet demand, because usually, if you're giving out sandbags, the local government down here will give maybe 6-7 bags to a house, and reality is you need 4 to 5 bags per door, right? So you're not even. It's just a perception that you are actually mitigating any damage. So this will allow us to actually prepare for storms properly, but also will allow us to recover through FEMA. FEMA pays 75%, and then the state through FEMA will pay another 12.5% of reimbursing all preparedness costs that are properly reported. So there's only a little call it 12.5% or something like that that is actually paid by the city once the reporting process goes through. So this is an example of private sector coming in and taking care of a very inefficient role of government in a physical setting. Not, innovation isn't, as you all know, all software. It's innovating physical processes as well. Go ahead. And the environmental considerations, making sure that the trees are planted in the right place. This is something that governments really didn't pay attention to for a long time. And they plant trees where the roots are going way into the ground, way too shallow planted, and they're taking out infrastructure left and right when storms come through. So making sure that the studies are there to know what critical infrastructure will get damaged from what trees in the event of a storm. And again, talking about native species and helping with flood containment. It has the added benefit of less maintenance costs throughout the year once that first year as a cycle has planted, because they're native to Florida, they don't require the same level of maintenance. Next slide. And Commissioner, take it away.
Okay, so thank you again for the introduction earlier. As was mentioned, I'm a third-generation firefighter. My family's been involved in public service for a very long time. So when I got on the commission a year ago, my intention was to look and see what our city is doing as far as prevention for health and safety factors. So the mayor touched on a lot of the infrastructure and the great work that's being done to preserve our infrastructure and prepare for a storm. I'm going to be talking more on what we're doing to prepare our residents as well as our employees for prevention as well, to make sure that they're safe during the storm. Okay, so what is our city doing to increase life safety and improve residential resiliency? So years ago, Miami-Dade Fire Station 40 was actually brought into our city's limits, and it provides the residents now with a top of the line emergency response provider. I work myself for Miami Beach Fire Rescue, but my grandfather actually worked for Miami-Dade Fire Rescue. They're an amazing entity. So we have an AED initiative, which stands for Automated External Defibrillator Initiative, and that's going to be to train our staff to help to save lives in case the need arises. Then we have a CERT program, which is our Community Emergency Response Team, and that's to train our residents. I'm going to touch on all of these in a bit as well. We have an Emergency and Evacuation Assistance Program, or the EEAP, and then the rest of this slide I'm going to touch on as we move on. So Miami-Dade Fire Rescue Station 40, they respond to 275,000 calls for service annually, and the Miami-Dade residents have the highest survival rates in the nation after suffering a blocked coronary artery, which is the leading cause of death in the United States, which is why a lot of my focus and our focus as a commission is to bring in those AEDs to ensure that we are one of the safest cities when it comes to heart health. In 2022, Miami-Dade Fire Rescue personnel participated in 5 community education events in our city, and it provided 540 residents with life-saving education and resources, a number that we hope to continue to build upon. This is an important factor, and this is something I want to highlight because this is I'm going to touch on this in every other slide that comes. So in 2022, Miami-Dade Fire Rescue had an average response time of 6 minutes and 12 seconds while responding to life-threatening emergencies. That number might seem like a long time, but it is a realistic number. In Miami Beach, we have 6 minutes that we have to get to a scene. Those are due to, simply getting to the apparatus, turning it on, and then navigating through these streets that are full of traffic and such. So this is the number that most departments go by, is 6 minutes. 6 minutes and 12 seconds is pretty much what we're looking for. Okay, so with the AED initiative that our city is putting forth, basically what we're trying to accomplish is to get 100% of our city employees trained in the use of AED, as well as the performance of CPR, or cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Why that's important? The mayor spoke on issues that we have with infrastructure that we're trying to address. So flooding, down power lines, trees that fall over that are not natural or native to our area. All of those things, what they lead to are road blockages. So that's 6 minutes and 12 seconds that Miami-Dade Fire Rescue is allotted to arrive at your doorstep. A lot of times that can turn into 15, 20, and upwards of 30 minutes because they can't get to the scene. These are things that we're trying to prevent by strengthening our infrastructure. But worst case scenario, if we cannot accomplish that, excuse me, then our employees and our residents are going to be trained. An additional but crucial component of this initiative is to equip every city vehicle and facility with life-saving equipment. So thus far, the mayor has done a fantastic job at acquiring AEDs for all of our police squad cars. So anytime you see a police car around our city, you know that they are equipped with this life-saving equipment. We also have this equipment. I'm so sorry. We also have this equipment at our rec center at the moment. So summer camp just kicked off. The Brianna Vergara Foundation, they were gracious enough to donate an AED that we can now have there at our rec center, so that if there were any incident that, you know, arose with our kids, they'll be safe as well. And we are in the process of training our staff on how to use it in continuing education, because they did get this training in the past as well. That's very important to us. What is an AED? So I don't want to get into too much of the details here. I'm going to just give you a breakdown of it. But basically, in my line of work, when I respond to an incident, if there is someone that is pulseless, we have these AEDs, and the police officers in Miami Beach have them as well. Basically, you attach them to the victim, and the monitor itself will read. It's self-explanatory. You turn it on and it would tell you, it'll advise you if there is a shockable rhythm, which, again, to not get into the details, it's ventricular fibrillation or pulseless ventricular tachycardia. Basically, once the monitor tells you to apply a shock, you would push a button, and then that would shock the victim. And then after that, you would start CPR. If it says no shock advised, then the person is not in a shockable rhythm, and more than likely, you know, you're just doing CPR at that point. If they don't have a pulse, and if they do, you're standing by for 911. So the most important thing that we're trying to let our residents as well as our employees know is the bottom of the slide. So you can help save a life if you respond quickly and take these actions. You call 911 for help and shout to another bystander to get an AED. So in blue, we're highlighting, are there any available? As I mentioned before, at our rec center, there is one available. And on our squad cars with the police officers, we have them available patrolling our streets on a daily basis. Number 2, start CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, to keep the blood circulating. In blue, it's highlighted. This is very important. Are you trained? So that's something we're addressing as well. We are going to have hopefully 100% of our employees trained in the performance of CPR. And then number 3, use an AED as soon as possible to restart the heart. And do you know how? Once again, very important to us. We are going to train all of our employees on how to use the AED. I'm going to skip this video. Okay. If we provide the equipment to empower our employees, lives can be saved. So over 350,000 people die of a sudden cardiac arrest in the United States every year, making it one of the country's leading causes of death. That's about one person dying every 90 seconds. The survival rate from cardiac arrest drops by 7 to 10% for every minute that a patient has to wait for defibrillation. This is key because this is a main reason of why we want to get an AED on each one of our city vehicles. So the idea is even the garbage truck that's picking up garbage in the morning will have an AED on it, and we'll have fully trained staff. So if somebody is jogging by and happens to collapse, the garbage man or woman can place the AED, and it'll eat into this number here. So the survival rate from cardiac arrest drops by 7 to 10% for every minute that a patient has to wait for defibrillation. If you go back to the initial slide where I mentioned that the Miami-Dade Fire Rescue, which is a great department, they have fire rescue units all over our county. They get to the scene in 6 minutes and 12 seconds. So if you do math, you can see that we don't want to waste any time. We want our employees and our residents to be as safe as they can be. And according to recent research from the National Institute of Health, a good mix of CPR and early defibrillation can save lives and boost survival rates to 70%. Douglas MacArthur Jewett. So before, when the introductions were made, it was said that I'm a third generation firefighter. So Douglas MacArthur Jewett is my grandfather. He was the first one. He was the one that started us down this journey. Then my father came after, and then my brother, sister, and I are also firefighters. So in a South Florida Sun Sentinel article in 1987, he was dubbed as the master of disaster. This is a quote from that article. Some people call Doug Jewett courageous. Some call him crazy. But when a building collapses or there's an earthquake, they just call him. So I thought it was important to highlight that here, because this is obviously we're speaking about disasters and preparedness. And my grandfather, from the very beginning, he saw a need and he jumped at the opportunity to help others. And that is why the mayor, who's sitting here with you guys, and why we are sitting here as well. The mayor saw a need with infrastructure, and I saw a need to make sure that as a firefighter and first responder, that I look at everything that our city is doing from a life safety perspective. And this is why these initiatives are very important to us. The Community Emergency Response Team. So what this is essentially is a program that is being started, or it's been around for a very long time, that it trains the residents of a community how to respond and help each other in times of need. So it developed as a result of the earthquakes in Japan and Mexico City in the 80s. Mexico City, this photo of my grandfather on the right, he's actually sitting on a rubble pile in Mexico City. He started the urban search and rescue teams that you see responding to Surfside, Haiti, and all throughout the country. He started that here with Miami-Dade Fire Rescue. So it basically trains volunteers in basic disaster response skills, such as fire safety, light search and rescue, team organization, and disaster medical operations. It offers a consistent nationwide approach to volunteer training and organization that professional responders can rely on during disaster situations, allowing them to focus on more complex tasks. This is very important for us as first responders. In these incidents, such as in Japan, Mexico City, and many others that we've seen throughout time, is that residents, neighbors are naturally going to run to each other's aid. And what was happening is that first responders were being called, and depleting our resources to rescue neighbors that were running to each other's aid because they didn't know how to do that safely. So they were finding themselves in harm's way as well. So this program was developed to train residents on how to do things safely so that they don't become a casualty as well, and it would further deplete our resources. So the CERT program is something that we're bringing to our city to train any resident that would like to be trained as well. The Emergency and Evacuation Assistance Program. So basically what this does is it provides free evacuation assistance to eligible residents living in Miami-Dade County who need specialized transportation and or sheltering, or who would like to receive a wellness call after a disaster. So it's a roster and a register that we're doing the best we can to get, our senior citizens or anyone with any sort of disability registered, so that we know that we have to look after them in times of a storm, because a lot of times they can't evacuate themselves. So in Miami Beach, for example, the fire department was actually sheltering and taking individuals from Miami Beach and driving them into the mainland to put them in a safer location. A lot of times schools are used as hurricane shelter and things like that. So here in West Miami, we have similar programs that we're using. Prior to an emergency, residents who may require medical monitoring, assistance with daily living, or have life-threatening medical equipment dependent on electricity should register for the EEAP to ensure help is available when needed. Pre-registered residents will receive priority during an emergency. It may also be utilized post-disaster to provide other assistance. So our city, once again, is assisting with this registration process. And finally, when an emergency arises, pre-registered residents will have priority over those who have not registered for the program. West Miami Emergency Coordinating Officer. So this is a liaison between the city, our city, and Miami-Dade County Emergency Operations Center. The state of Florida has district coordinating officers throughout that serve as liaisons between the state and the different county emergency operations centers. And the West Miami coordinating officer is there to lobby on behalf of our city to ensure that the funds or resources coming down from the state include those that are specific to the needs of our city. And then local partnerships. These are very important. Our city is not the biggest. We rely on a lot of partnerships to accomplish the tasks that we need to accomplish to keep our residents safe. So we saw partnerships with local big box stores such as the Home Depot in order to sponsor events in which the community comes together to build emergency disaster supply kits. And then the kits, here's an example of some of the things that are in them. Water and food, of course, are very important. Battery powered or hand crank radio, flashlights, first aid kits, extra batteries and such. Whistles, dust masks, etc. So what we're doing as a city to assist our residents is ensuring that they understand the necessities, the things that might be useful during the time of a storm. People here, for the most part, have lived here for a long time, have all lived through storms, and they know what's necessary. Flashlights are essential, food and water. There's certain incidents where toilet paper becomes very important, as we've seen recently, where the toilet paper was sold out during COVID for some reason. But water, food, things like that are very essential, and we help our residents to build these kits with local partnerships such as through the Home Depot. And the public information campaigns. Again, it's very important to get the information out. Information is power, And FEMA has a Ready campaign that basically educates and empowers Americans to take simple steps to prepare for and respond to potential emergencies. This campaign basically asks individuals to do three things: get an emergency supply kit, which our city is helping them to put together, make a family emergency plan, and be informed about the different types of emergencies that could occur and appropriate responses. And then another one that they have is the Halfway Full is Halfway There campaign. It's being put forth by the Florida Department of Emergency Management. It encourages residents and visitors to keep their gas tanks at least half full through hurricane season to ensure they have enough fuel to evacuate as soon as possible without worrying about long lines at gas stations, etc. I think the mayor, he touched on it before. We are trying to work on EV charging stations and things like that. So there's a lot of individuals that don't have to worry about gas tanks being half full, but we also want to keep them in mind that they're being environmentally conscious. We want to make sure they have a means of evacuating as well. Well, here it is actually. You can take it away, Mr. Mayor.
Well, and on that point, you know, electric vehicles, as it was mentioned, I work in the industry and the charging side of it. But electric vehicles are obviously on the rise. There are certain fleets that are just going to go electric entirely in the next decade, but the charging stations aren't meeting that necessity yet. I think the national number right now for charging stations is about 36% uptime, meaning that that would be the equivalent of going to your gas station and only be able to get gas 36% of the time, right? So especially with the lack of charging stations in multifamily homes and in apartment buildings, people rely on public infrastructure for charging more and more. But there's already firms that are showing that in Florida, for example, which is a very long state, if you're in South Florida trying to evacuate, there is not enough infrastructure especially with the added demand, to actually travel safely long distance that are used for the evacuation routes. So this is something that's being slightly addressed with NEVI funding. Since this slide was made, there was a good progress on this, something that I personally advocated for a long time, which is that federal funding should be given to charging providers that have a requisite uptime of 95% or more. And that was added into the NEVI funding. NEVI funding, I wish I could tell you what the acronym is for. I always forget. Something electric vehicle, something. And it's about, I think, $7 billion coming in through that to fund public charging stations on the corridors and then within urban communities. But this framework to making sure that these charging stations are put out and that there's enough load to meet demand during an evacuation, especially as more vehicles turned electric, is going to be extremely important, especially with some government vehicles even going electric, and what that can cause during emergency with power outages. So all these things need to be weighted. Electric vehicles are fantastic. I'm in the industry, I love them, but there is risk when it comes to emergency management right now that need to be mitigated, and can be with the right planning from a regional and state level, if not federal. Go ahead. So after the storm, as I mentioned, there is no shortage of trucks. Well, there's a shortage, but there's no shortage of people who are trying to make it down to a storm that have any sort of truck with a tailgate, sand truck, pickup truck, whatever it is, to get down to take debris removal contracts, which for you know, a square mile could be, you know, over $1.5 million, sometimes even $2 million, and for a debris removal contract. So debris removal is massive. Having that planned ahead of time, having those contracts in place to make sure that you can execute without having to, from a government level especially, having to have a special meeting in the dark and award a contract. Having that in place is very important. Checking in on vulnerable populations, like we said, we try to register them, try to meet them where they are, and making sure that they have food, water, and medicine, anything else they need to survive the immediate period after a storm. which depending on the severity of storm could could be a couple of days, or in some cases it could be a week or more. Thankfully, I think we've got it to the point in Florida with the infrastructure we have that we won't have anything like Puerto Rico has seen, but either way, it could be an extended period of time. Dealing with FEMA and its consultants. FEMA is pretty organized they open a grant portal that you essentially register with, and you start putting in the stuff you report for reimbursements, right? So that's everything from overtime on and police to sandbag operations to food that you have to give out to non-perishables, to debris removal, everything. Prepare to immediate response. Immediate response has to be taken care of in 6 months after a storm in order to qualify. And then there's all sorts of regulations, as government loves to put, in making sure that you are reporting correctly with FEMA. That process could take sometimes multiple years to get reimbursed by FEMA. And what happens is they go through a consulting contracts where you might start off with them, and then they'll bring consultants because they don't have the workload, obviously, to manage all these national projects. So they'll bring in a KPMG or some other consulting firm, and then their contract will run out, and they'll bring in a new consulting firm, and you've been dealing with this old one, and now you got to deal with this new one from scratch, and it delays the process. And it's a very complex process. There's firms, we as a city do it internally, but there's firms that deal with this uniquely, just federal compliance reporting, large firms, and it's just a very complex, lengthy process in order. But in that time period, you're either one, you were able to pull money out of reserves to pay for all these costs, or two, you have some sort of line of credit from a bank that is accumulating interest, which is not reimbursable. So it's making sure that you have your internal controls ready for FEMA is very important. Post-disaster evaluations. I think every time there's an issue, you need to evaluate where the weaknesses were, even when things were not as planned. So, for example, like I keep mentioning, and we're hoping we don't have it today again. We had a torrential downpour, and we had a stormwater pipe pump that actually got hit by lightning and went off, and that caused more flooding than we've had in any hurricane in the last 10 years. So that's not something that we actually planned for a direct hit for the pump, for the stormwater pump. Now we can go into figuring out how we address that to make sure that doesn't happen in a much more major storm with much more major implications. So, and then the last thing is promote restoration efforts by expediting permitting processes, et cetera. So after a storm, there's just so much damage, and so much debris, and so much confusion, and everything is expensive, and there's not enough contractors, and it's always a mess. So we try to make sure that we expedite these processes. For example, things as simple as your fence went down, we're not going to make you go get a new permit for that fence, right? It was the same fence in the same place. We'll let you build it, inspect it, and get it over with. Things that just speed up processes to get neighborhoods back to normal life and continue, the economic reinvigoration of the city and the community. We have to take any of those steps. And I think that's, next slide. That's it. Dean?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That has been so intriguing. And you not only addressed the local level, but also the connections up to FEMA, and then the actual use of the related federal framework. So this is very important for our younger colleagues and students who are here on the call, among other participants, because that really puts flesh on the bones of what we try to educate them on with the practical application of the federal frameworks. But then there are very few opportunities to really have that immersive conversation with those who really apply them at the local level, and then also from the, if you will, you're a leader, but then overall, technically from the city management point of view, what it really takes to implement not only response, but then also already starting with this mitigation, and then FEMA grant money and how that works. And obviously there is a business around it and things like that. So very, very important. Then also, Commissioner, I wanted to thank you for addressing or for taking it to the all hazards level with your AED initiative, and that's supported apparently by Mr. Mayor, by you. So this is also great, where we really see this whole community and all hazards approach, not only in action but actually in enhancement, thinking out of the box at the local level. So that's outstanding. And then also, Sam, thank you. This is one of our students who provided the resolution for the acronym for NEVI, so National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure. So thank you. This is good. Now I would like to, number one, so give the floor to the audience, and number two, so you could either ask your question verbally if you want to take the mic virtually, or just leave your question in the chat. And John Hamilton said in his region, wherever he is located, and also as a courtesy, if you wanted, participants, you could briefly, if you wanted, introduce yourself and state your location in the chat, and that could also help with Q&A. So then the two gentlemen here, our two local leaders, better understand where you are coming from also regionally. So there was one reference to wildfire season. Maybe you want to, within the all hazards context, maybe address that. And then also a nice former colleague from Penn State, Nick Eftimiades, great out of the, so no, we're not advertising other universities programs here, but he's thanks Nick for being here. And his question is, what is the process for determining housing codes and building standards to ensure resilience, as far as that is within your remit at the city level? So maybe we can start with that and see what else comes up in the chat. Thank you.
Sure. So I think Commissioner might have some more insight on this. Thankfully, we do not handle the building code down here. And I say thankfully because I know it's extremely complex, and we've, after Hurricane Andrew down here in 1992, the state of Florida and Miami-Dade County became far more serious about the building code. And now, after Surfside, became a lot more stringent on its inspections, et cetera, right, for larger buildings. But I will say that obviously we're talking about a US, but from a worldwide perspective, I mentioned I deal a lot internationally, a lot of clients in Latin America, and there is a complete lack of infrastructure, right? Complete lack of necessary building codes. But you don't need to get to US levels in order to get to resilient infrastructure, to get resilient housing. There are extremely cheap ways and efficient ways. I mean, frankly, I've dealt with people in Latin America that built all communities. A house can take less than a week to build and be resilient to all of their natural disasters. It would not meet a US building code. It would definitely not meet a Miami-Dade County building code, but it would be resilient to all of their natural disasters. And as a society, international level, we can actually get there. But in reference to your question, Commissioner, do you have anything to add on that? I know you deal with these building codes a lot more at a local level.
Well, I'd say that a lot of, and again, I'm a firefighter. I am a fire inspector as well, but I haven't worked in that field for quite some time. So we do have our fire prevention bureau that their daily job is to go out to buildings and ensure that they are meeting fire standards nationally. What I would say though is to add to what Mr. Mayor said is, along with properties, with the building code focusing on properties becoming safer for hurricanes and for high winds and such, they're actually becoming a lot safer as well for fires and for fire resistance. So back in the day, a lot of homes were built with wood and those types of natural materials that burned a lot more readily. Now they're built more with concrete and other materials that aren't going to burn as readily. In addition to that, some of the building codes are fire sprinklers, extinguishing systems, things like that. They have to be at a certain distance apart and every floor of a high rise, for example. So what we're finding is the percentage of fires that fire departments are getting, that number is going lower and lower. So where my grandfather, when he first became a firefighter, it was probably something, actually, as a matter of fact, it was 100% of his calls were fires, car accidents, things of that nature, because paramedicine didn't exist when he first got hired. So there was no pre-hospital emergency response system when it came to medicine. He was actually one of the first paramedics here in Miami as well. And then the fire department and the fire department in general has started to develop. So now I would say that for myself, it's probably maybe 5 to 10% of the calls that we respond to are fires. 90% are EMS. So the building code has a large, it's a lot to do with that. So we get a lot of fire calls that we show up to a scene or an incident, and the fire's already been put out by a resident that was properly trained in the use of a fire extinguishing system. So that's a little bit to touch on that, but again, that's a different department entirely.
Now, yeah, just to follow up on that, you are seeing a lot more, and from a city code level, et cetera, from having the houses elevated, basically put onto an artificial, call it a hill, just elevate a little bit to avoid the flood disaster. And then on the bay side, you're seeing a lot more of that. Plus, houses on the water, you're seeing a lot more stilt building, and a lot of it being required by code, to allow the number one to stop from the flooding, but number two to allow for the windstorm resistance to be less. And a lot of that has to do with the roofs too, making sure that, between a gable roof and I forget what the other roofs, to make sure that there's an even amount of wind resistance across the whole roof, so it doesn't blow a roof off. And a lot of this is also driven by the insurance industry, frankly, which is a big mess in Florida and hopefully is being taken care of now. And the insurance industry was also driving a lot of decisions, not just code, on what they'll insure and what they will insure for in terms of roof, et cetera.
And I think to touch really briefly on the wildland as well, I believe you mentioned that. We are fortunate that we don't see that too often here, neither in our city of West Miami. We'll never see that. And then in Miami Beach, from time to time, due to fireworks or things like that, we will have the berms on the beach catch fire. But as far as anything that can spread, like you see in other regions, California, things of that nature, we're very fortunate that we do not have to deal with that, because those are fires in general are dangerous, but those are very unpredictable fires and very, very dangerous.
Thank you. If you still have 3 minutes, we are approaching the hour. So there are 2 questions. Maybe we can make those the last 2 questions. So number one is from Sam. How serious is sea level rise? Probably we know it's serious, but in your area and other responsibility, how serious is it in Miami-Dade? And I knew you a little more with Miami, with West Miami, a little more land side, but elevation is very important. Also, so how serious is that within your area of responsibility, and what are you doing? What do you think you can be done more, to overturn it, to mitigate? And Mr. Mayor already addressed that. So that's number one. And maybe we can bunch that up with another question. Speaking of California, so this is from Blake Falkenberg, who is located over on the Pacific coast in St. Luis Obispo, where he is a safety professional. And his question regards disaster preparedness. Does the city of Miami or West Miami or Miami Beach, as far as you're able to comment on it, do those cities, or does Miami-Dade County have mutual aid agreements with other cities or counties? And if so, have they proven effective?
Sure. So I'll answer a part of it, and the commissioner can answer the last part. So I do want the commissioner to touch on what he's seen out there in terms of sea level rise in Miami Beach. But in West Miami is a little more inland, but not that much. I would say, look, it's a big problem, but it's not an unaddressable problem. Years ago, I heard of enthusiasts with proper infrastructure and taking a little more seriously our situations on the natural side down here. But look, we can elevate roads. we can improve storm drainage. We can build correctly. I think it's addressable. But yes, it is I would say a major issue that probably the next generation is probably going to have to deal with the ramifications a little more than we are. On the second question, I'm sorry, what was the beginning of the second question? It was about
Mutual aid.
the mutual aid. So the mutual aid, we have agreements with everyone down here locally. Even in regards to, I set up task forces recently on human trafficking with all the police departments down here, joint enforcement zones, etc. I would say during hurricanes, we're all very coordinated, but in a sense, it's a little bit of a free for all. The Miami-Dade County has technically the largest community down here in Miami would be what they call the unincorporated zone in Miami-Dade County. It has I don't know how many million residents. So if you were to pick a city in Miami-Dade County that was the largest, I would say Miami-Dade County unincorporated would be. So they have to take care of their unincorporated areas like if it was a city. And every other city has problems. So I would say from a local government coordinating downward is, pretty good. But unless there is some problem that is specific to a certain community and is not happening, like for example, there's some sort of like Surfside was a good example. Surfside, the collapse, Miami Beach was out there. Surfside, it's its own city actually. Miami Beach is a city adjoining Surfside. Miami Beach Fire was there first on the scene, and they were and a bunch of cities, including West Miami, send their police, send fire rescue, send urban social rescues teams over to the city very quickly. But in a hurricane, for example, if it's unless one area is hit much harder than the rest for some reason, it's a little bit of a free for all in that sense. There's not much that government can do to help each other at that moment. Commissioner, can you address the sea level rise you've seen and some other points on to finish that out?
Miami weather is very unpredictable, and there are a lot of issues being addressed in Miami Beach. And it can be very sunny outside and the weather could be beautiful, and it rains for 10 minutes and all of a sudden you go outside and the streets are flooded. So Miami Beach is dealing with a lot of issues. They're installing pumps, they're increasing seawall heights, they're battling over there, but that's not an issue that's going to be unique to Miami Beach. It's a barrier island, so it is protecting a bit, city of Miami and the borders that would eventually get to us. But Miami Beach is definitely going to be facing some issues over the next bunch of years with infrastructure. I don't want to speak too much on that because I'm a firefighter over there, and that's something for one of the commissioners to speak on over there. But I would say just from firsthand experience that luckily I drive a truck and I can get in and out of Miami Beach to get to work. But as far as those residents that live there, they are dealing with a lot of issues of flooding and property damage and such. And luckily for us here, as the mayor mentioned before, our city had the foresight with the septic to sewer transition. Some of the elevations of our roads, a lot of our homes are up elevated on crawl spaces. So our city is pretty well situated when it comes to flooding, but we do have our issues at times, just as the mayor mentioned yesterday. I also was going to mention that as far as mutual aid goes, it is a bit of a free for all when everyone around us is impacted, but when it's something specific to a certain city or area, everyone bands together and we help our neighbors out. You saw it on the West Coast when all the flooding happened over there. The urban search and rescue teams from down here in Miami and Miami-Dade County were sent to assist and try to get those neighbors of ours back up on their feet. So we all work very well together, but we have to take care of home base first when everyone is affected together.
Makes a lot of sense. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Commissioner, we are 4 minutes over. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Thanks all participants. This has been very intriguing and insightful and also open in your answers, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Commissioner. So thank you for that. Thanks everybody for joining. We are continuing the series throughout summer. So watch out for an invite for our July occurrence, and be safe, be good. And we'll hopefully see you soon. Thanks for joining. Thanks again, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Commissioner. Bye-bye.
Thank you
for having us, and hope you got something out of it.
Absolutely, we did. Outstanding. Thank you. Bye-bye.